Whoa, it's live.
I'm gonna see if so you're gonna email everybody? Yes.
Who do I hear? Us?
So you're gonna email everybody? Yes.
Oh, it's like a few seconds after. Who do I hear?
People get
Us? Oh, yeah. Sounds like it's like a few seconds after.
Right.
Sounds like
That's probably the feedback. The fact that your thing is on. We shouldn't be hearing anything. Why are we hearing it?
I turned it off.
Oh, good.
Ooh.
How do I log into the new one? Funny, I can't see you.
No?
Maybe if they were wheeling in front of the flash. No. Try drawing something. Say like, hey everybody, like
Maybe it's just
starting in a second. Draw
Yeah.
like
Maybe it's just me. Can unmute it. Okay. All right. Animation lesson for the Adventures of Drunky Indiegogo campaign is officially okay to go after many technical trials and tribulations. So, thank you everyone who is listening. Thanks for donating to the campaign, and I hope that you get something out of this class. I wasn't sure how much animation everyone has kind of under their belt who's part of the class, so I thought I would start with basics. There are 12 basic principles of animation. A lot of people are probably familiar with the very first one, which is squash and stretch. The bouncing ball is the most popular form of squash and stretch example. When you have a ball that you want to animate, as the ball falls, it stretches out. And squashes as it hits the ground. and it stretches back out as it leaves the ground. Squash and stretch. Very basic. You are now an animator if you can draw that same ball as I. Moving in arcs is another big thing for animation. I didn't do a great example of it with the ball, but you want things to move in arcs so that they look like smooth motion. If you have an arm that is animating and it moves in anything but an arc, it's going to look messed up. Not a great arc, but a functional arc. Can people see my face as I'm doing this? It's just the screen? All right. So, and we also can't see images that I've got, can we? It's just the flash screen. Okay. So I've got a couple of images that are good examples of what I'm talking about. Oh. This?
No, screen share.
Screen share?
You click on that.
Oh.
You can do your whole window if you want.
There.
They
Now
just see
people can
everything
see
now.
me. Awesome.
All I
Okay.
can see is her now.
Really? Oh, no, it'll go away.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay, this is much better. I can handle this a little bit easier. So I've got the arcs covered.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that looks great.
Nice. All right. This is better. I've got some images that I saved for an excellent example of arcs in animation. Milt Kahl is the Disney animator who is kind of the master of the arc and acting. So you can kind of see in this frame by frame animation, you could draw a line through this arc that is happening with the character. Arcs are kind of happening on a macro level and a micro level. So for smooth motion, we want arcs. Slow in and slow out is the power of easing and creating natural animation. As you animate, you're going to get some nice natural flowing animation. If you have ease in and ease out. Slow in, slow out. Another basic knocked out of the way. So anticipation is a little bit more complicated. I did a little bit of rough animation with Drunky earlier today. Anticipation is if Drunky, before turning his head, has a little bit of forward motion. That forward motion is the anticipation, and it kind of creates a little bit more natural acting, flowing character movement. Something that you don't really see on shows like Family Guy, who have pretty stripped down basic animation. Sorry, Family Guy, it's serviceable. But so follow through and overlap, stuff moves at different rates. Something like ooh, that's an interesting drawing. Got a human character with arms and legs. Their body will move. Their arms will stay behind a little bit. As they go. So the secondary animation, or follow through and overlap rather, is the fact that the arms are going to move a little bit after the body. You can kind of do some stuff with the head. are moving. Pretty basic. All right, so a secondary action is similar to follow through and overlap, and it's things like hair and loose tissue, like beer guts and boobs, move differently and continue moving after the character's movement has ended. So it's true. So when you see a female character sort of like bounce down onto the screen and her boobs keep jiggling, that's secondary. Great to have characters with a nice secondary action. And then some of the last principles of basic animation are exaggeration, solid drawing, and appeal. Solid drawing is excellent, appeal is excellent, exaggeration is excellent, but it's all kind of speaks for itself. This is a great picture or great image of Mickey from The Brave Little Tailor, the Jack and the Beanstalk, or it's not Jack and the Beanstalk, but he fights a giant. He does multiple giant-based adventures. Here's some good examples of exaggeration on this lower image. Great exaggeration here. Solid drawing means you can see this nice construction in his skull, the way it attaches to his body. Some sketches here in the lines. So, an appeal, obviously, it's Mickey. He's great. You can't go better than Mickey. All right. So when it comes to character construction, flat versus dimensional, you want to think about what's believable, what tone you're going for, who the audience is. Stylized action might kind of come from being the style. If it's simple, you're not going to have as naturalistic acting. Let's see. And then there's something that I like to think of as internal logic to the character design, which Mickey is another excellent example of that when it comes to his ears. Mickey's ears don't actually make any sense. They're not attached to any one part of his body, or one part of his head. They just kind of move to make a good silhouette all the time. But you don't really notice because it looks so good and the rule is followed consistently. So that's some good stuff with character construction. Staging, I wanted to bring up because it's not technically part of the animation, but it'll affect how your animation reads. So staging, you have your frame and you've got your character in the frame. Let's make it drunky. There's drunky. So in the frame, you've got a character, an upshot where you see the ceiling behind your character, and you know that the camera is placed a little bit below the character looking up at him. Or the down shot is a little bit more typical for drunky because he's so short, where you see the floor plane behind him. And this will kind of affect how the mood and the way that the shot is reading and the scene is reading. For drunky, we tend to do down shots because whoever he's interacting with is taller than him, and they, from their point of view, would be seeing him pretty low. To make a character feel a little smaller in the frame, push him down there, and suddenly you have a tiny drunky kind of being affected by the world around him a little bit more. Whereas here, it's a little bit more of a hero shot. So staging, and actually as I was thinking about staging, I remembered hearing about the movie WALL-E and the fact that there were so many shots where, let's see, in the frame, WALL-E was small, and the camera, here's WALL-E's little head. The camera was handheld, and there was all of this kind of like stuff in the foreground, lots of junk in the foreground. So it's like the camera is placed back and far away from him. And they had trouble, they actually had issues with stuff like this, with shots like these, because the test audiences wondered who was watching the main character, because it felt like they were too well placed in, like the camera was too well placed in the environment, and it felt less like a movie and more like you were just like spying on him. So it's interesting to think about staging, think about what you can see in the frame, and I'll kind of go back to that more when I talk about acting. So I wanted to also do a brief kind of mention of timing in relation to acting and information in the scene. So as we're animating, we're communicating the feelings of a character through character animation, but what the character is saying is also conveying information to the audience. So while you want the animation to be cool and stylish and like eye-catching, there's times to kind of take a pause and let things stand still so that you can hear what's going on. That's kind of more like less about animation and more about just like movie making and storytelling. So it's okay for characters to hold still. They don't have to float around. They don't have to necessarily be doing stuff like tapping their fingers unless it informs the scene. So don't feel like you have to have a character moving all the time necessarily. Sort of let the listening character direct the audience with their body language towards another character who's speaking or doing something more important. Good stuff to think about. So now I'm kind of in the part of the class that I was most excited about after the basics, which is acting and character acting, which is kind of like my favorite part of the entire animation process. Usually I like to start a scene, if I have a piece of audio, by doing really rough thumbnails of the character, sort of timing it out to the audio. Let the character change and work his way through the scene. Make sure that the poses are contrasting to one another well enough so that you can kind of get an idea of how the motion will work once you start animating and how the feeling is going to kind of progress as the scene goes along. So the basics of acting, naturalistic acting versus exaggerated acting. You kind of want to consider the tone of the piece or the scene in which the acting is occurring. Drunky is going to have some scenes where he is way over the top and ridiculous and Looney Toony, but there are also going to be a couple of moments where he's a little bit more low-key and sensitive because you want people to be thinking about what he's feeling rather than what he's doing. Contrasting moods and attitudes of a character as they work through a thought process or new information. I kind of like to do, I like to have moments of thought in my characters where, you know, they're talking, acting, doing stuff, but between these thoughts, they might look away from whoever they're addressing and sort of become in their own heads as they think through something. And as they realize something new, they change again. And it makes it a little bit more believable to show that they're thinking rather than just sort of working through a script. Let's see. So yeah, what's going on inside of a character's head is actually something that I like to think about a lot as I do my character animation. Without speaking, a character can communicate a lot of things. What are they thinking about when they aren't speaking is kind of a big part of what guides my acting process. And you're animating a character's personality as well as their action. So you're not only, say, like animating Drunky is walking down a street. A guy walking down a street would not look like Drunky walking. A regular guy walking down a street wouldn't look like Drunky walking down a street. Drunky is kind of a happy-go-lucky guy. He's usually pretty positive and upbeat. That's, you know, outside of any context, but his walk would be way more animated and stylized and kind of weirdly confident in himself, I kind of tend to think when I hear about Drunky. So think about that as you're animating a character. What's motivating them? What kind of choices do they make? How good do they feel about what they do? It's all kind of stuff that will be affected by the acting choices you make. So Facial acting is pretty important to me. Eyes and brows are what I like to focus on a lot when I do characters, because people naturally look at the eyes of a character as they're acting. And I find that when you get really solid facial expressions, the body is informed by that. You could have great body language that is made a little ambiguous by ambiguous facial acting. So I keep in mind this area and how important it can be. Even really subtle changes to the brows can change a lot about a character. Like, so that's one version. That's another version. That one kind of makes Drunky look like a dick. So keep in mind that little changes like that can have a big effect on how people read your character and read the scene. I also like to direct the viewer with characters' eyes a lot. Sort of the direction that a character is looking will inform where the audience looks. Give Drunky some teeth. Having a character, let's see, what have I done? Having a character blink. And look elsewhere in a scene will definitely change the direction that the audience looks. So bear that in mind. Don't neglect eye movement. And like, you know, if you want a character to guide the action, remember that there's got to be something that they're looking at on the other side. Let's see. So I think that body language and silhouette is definitely worth talking about, obviously, because that's going to be the fastest read you can get on a character. Body language and silhouette are definitely always going to be informed by line of action, which is a really popular character animation technique to get a good, solid, bold pose. Preston Blair is the master of character or of lines of action. Where is... This is a greater example than I will be able to produce on instantaneously. So these lines of action help action read really well. You can see it big or small. You know what's happening with the scene. You don't want ambiguous lines like this. And actions like this just tend to be easier to animate as well, because you've sort of got this basic construction built for you that you can always follow. And
There's a question for you. Hi, Katie. This is great. Are you going to show lip sync and how to make walk cycles?
ooh, walk cycles are tough. I can definitely show lip sync, but let's see.
Not now.
I didn't really plan on it, but yeah, I'm gonna keep going with acting, and then I can definitely address anything like, you know, specific after I work through my outline. Otherwise, I'm gonna get totally derailed. But I'm glad that people are liking it. Okay, I feel like I'm talking like to myself over here. So let's see. I was on eyes and brows. Yeah, body language. I actually I highly recommend picking up a book called What Everybody Is Saying by Joe Navarro. It's a book. So let's see. What Everybody Is Saying. saying. Nice. So this book by Joe Navarro is actually not about acting at all. It's just about reading body language of people. But I learned a lot that informs my acting with animation and my posing with animation. It's just entirely a book about how to kind of speed read people's body language. And it talks about stance, like the way that someone is planted on the ground. If someone's feet are facing, if they're facing what they're facing, it means that they're totally engaged. If you're talking to someone at a bar and their torso is kind of turned away from you, or their torso turns toward you, but their feet are facing away from you, it means that they aren't really into you, or they might want to leave the situation. It's all really subconscious stuff that seems like it might not be a big deal, but it actually is pretty important to informing the subtext of what a character is doing. And then from what everybody is saying, I guess I'm gonna get rid of that now. Open body language, which is, you know, I keep doing this one pose with hands on hips, but open body language is someone who's sort of ready to receive whatever the person they're, you know, talking to. They're ready to engage and be receptive and aren't guarded and aren't, you know, protected. They're pretty comfortable where they are, versus closed body language, where they cover their torso, cross their legs, stuff like this, a little bit less engaged. You could even have their, let's see, even have their head turned away a little bit. I like to do a sketch, and then once you have a sketch done, see how much more you can push it. This is actually very like non-extreme version of. These two different levels of body language are pretty great. Read quickly, do better lines of action than I'm giving you guys right now. But another thing that I picked up from what everybody is saying is this is a little bit vocab word style, but bilateral versus unilateral gestures. A bilateral gesture is when both hands are doing something, both shoulders are doing something, versus a unilateral gesture where one hand is doing something. A bilateral gesture tends to be a little bit more sincere. A character who shrugs with one shoulder is less committed than a character who's shrugging with both shoulders. They say something pretty different about what the character is feeling and going through. So I like to bear all that stuff in mind. I guess I don't have to leave that. I should save that. Let's see. The effect of gravity on a character is another thing I wanted to talk about, which also actually comes from what everybody is saying. Really, seriously, like, get this book. It's really good, and it's like $10 on Amazon, I think. So a character who is happy will do a lot of gravity-defying movement, a lot of bouncing, a lot of let's see, a lot of bouncing, a lot of upward, easy upward motion. Upward motion will happen quickly in a happy character because he's not fighting gravity as much. Whereas a sad character will be affected by gravity, and their upward movement will happen a little bit more slowly. And other parts of their character will continue to be affected by gravity, even as they try to make upward motion. Arms will keep hanging down. And then they'll be quickly brought back down by gravity. Probably a lot of heavy bounce on something like that. Sad. Let's see. All right, this is a little bit more intense character animation style, but I like to think about where the energy of a character's motion is coming from. So say you got a character, just really basic construction, torso, hips, legs, hands. So this character could have their energy start moving from their pelvis. Let's see, for this, from their pelvis. Their energy could come from their shoulders or from their head. It's sort of what leads the motion in a character. So a character could lead with their head and start moving. Say they start stepping forward. The head is what moves the fastest, guiding this motion a little bit more than the other body parts. I tend to think that, in my personal animation, I tend to do a thing where characters who are a little bit more thoughtful and are moving with intent or caution kind of lead with their heads. A confident character will lead more with their chest. This is sort of where the center of action is going to come from. So that's a leading with the chest pose. A sexy lady character might tend to lead with her hips. This is kind of the forward motion. And then everything else in the character, if they're leading with whatever part of their body they're leading with, is going to be the forward-most part of the character. Character leading with the hips. Character leading with the chest. Character leading with the head. Everything else is kind of following whatever that leading center of motion is. Let's see. There's also the energy of a single motion, which what I mean by that is, say that you've got a character who wants to point at something. So here's the basic character. Got a really short neck for a little bit. So there's the body. Say you want this character, very top heavy. You want this character to point at something. So raise the arm up. All right, so now you kind of got the arm up there. You could, as you lead this point, have the elbow move first. Let's see, I got that. All right. So the elbow is where the center of action is coming from. Everything else will drag behind the elbow. Which turns into something really cartoony, actually. Elbow still leading. Gotta get the arc in. Arm is turning insane. Really long arm guy. Let's see if we can fix it. That's a little better. And point. All right. Kind of slow. And a nice weird bounce. So you can see that he's kind of leading with the elbow and everything else is whipping behind it a little bit. You can also, if you want to not just do the lazy, dirty version. Because the elbow is hinged right there, everything that is after the elbow will bend forward a little more in the bounce. So you've got the kind of floppy point versus also I'm having fun just doodling animation, so I hope everyone is enjoying it. Ooh, do I have too many layers? There we go. A point that isn't led so much by the elbow, but is led by the hand. Kind of a subtle difference, but let's see, where is he going to end up pointing? Wonder if this will work. Bounce. Slowly. Oop. A little different. 1 point. Ignore the fact that his arm gets insanely long versus the elbow base point, which is a little bit floppier. This stuff all kind of deals with muscle groups, what muscle groups are tense. If a point is led with the shoulder, I'm like, oh yeah, you can see me, okay. If a point is led with the shoulder, there's gonna be a different power center in the movement. If it's led with the elbow, it's a little floppier. You can have floppy wrist, which, you know, think about what muscle groups are stiff, how rigid the character is, how rigid the acting is. The secondary bounce is really going to affect how relaxed a character feels. There's not going to be a big amount of secondary bounce on something like, let's see, something like this. It's kind of a like floppy arm point, but if you bring this bounce in a little bit, it'll turn it a little bit more rigid and severe. A little bit less goofy. Oh, this is still a little bit noodle arm. So yeah, it's pretty, you know, mess around with it. I hope some of you are animating at home and doing a better job than me. So what time is it? Wow, it's 3:50 already. I guess I've got some closing thoughts, but I can do, should I go through lip sync, you think, before I do that? Sure. So lip sync, what is a good, I think I actually, should I pull up snack down stuff for lip sync as an example? All right, so I'm currently at the studio working on a project other than Drunky called the Snack Down. I promise this is not like a fake promo, but it's a good example of what I've got going on with lip sync. I have some good lip sync sets. Let's just go to design, character. These are some of the characters from Snackdown, looking good. I'm gonna take this sport guy who is the host, put him in his own project so that you can kind of see him on his own. There's somewhere I can, I'm gonna bring in some audio to do lip sync with. So, audio, perfect. That's a good one. All right. So I'm going to bring in this audio to the timeline. Let's see if we can. I'm going to be able to, can people hear my audio? I guess they can. So I'm going to bring in this audio. Ooh, I can hear myself. Let's see if we can. People to, can people hear my audio? I guess they can. So bring in this audio. I can hear myself. See if we can.
Soup is a liquid food. All liquid.
Can you hear that?
Soup is a liquid food.
Yeah,
All
here.
Oh, great. That's awesome.
Soup is a liquid food.
Yeah.
Turn off your window.
What have I done?
Is your mic on or your,
Oh, yeah.
your speaker on?
Yeah. You're right. I can put in headphones so that I can hear the audio for lip sync.
It's like really bad.
Ooh, yeah.
Oh, now it's ready. Now it's good.
Okay. I can put in headphones. All right. So we've got this audio. I wonder if there's a way I can mute. I don't want to mute my microphone, but I don't want to hear myself in my ear. So the way that we usually set up lip sync, or it's a really handy way to set up lip sync, is to have this mouth symbol that covers the basic sounds that you're going to use in lip sync. I'm going to put the audio in. It covers the basic sounds.
You zoom in on the head.
Yes. That you're going to use in lip sync. So the way that we've got it set up in Flash is that you set it to single frame. So it's only showing the first frame of this lip sync set right now. Soup is a liquid food. Okay. So the way that we've got it set up in Flash is that you set it to single frame. You can set it to any frame you want. First frame of this lip sync set, right? Open mouth, teeth mouth. This one's L. All right. So you can set it to any frame you want. Open mouth. Also, I hope that you guys don't think I sound too weird. I'm hearing myself talk a few seconds after I say everything in my ear, so it's a little nuts. Soup. Those are tough, actually, for lip sync. I'm hearing myself talk a few seconds after I say everything in my ear, so it's a little nuts. Some people like to use the waveform to help them do lip sync. I don't tend to use the waveform as much as I use my ear, but it's totally up to you. Soup. Some people like to use the waveform to help them do lip sync. I don't tend to use the waveform as much as I use my ear, but it's totally up to you. I'm also doing this I'm doing this lip sync on twos because I like to tend to do my character animation on twos, and I want the mouth to line up with the character animation. So I'm also doing this lip sync. But you can also use ones if you want. It totally is up to you and what animation style. Oh, on twos. That's right. I didn't even go through ones and twos. So the typical speed that any film runs at is 24 frames per second. And I had to take my headphone out. Runs at 24 frames per second. If you're animating on ones, it means that you're drawing a picture for every frame of film that will go by. So you would have 24 drawings, potentially, for 1 second of animation, which is extremely labor intensive, but looks great for certain styles. But on twos, it means that you're doing 1 drawing for every 2 frames of film. So there's going to be 12 drawings in 1 second. And you can even, depending on your style, there are animators like Bill Plimpton who work on like 8s where there's 4 drawings in a second. And it's definitely a stylistic choice, super choppy. Anime tends to run at a really low frame rate like that where, 3s, 4s, so that there's only a few drawings per second. But if you keep consistent in your style, it can look really nice. So, mess around with what works for you. I've done a few TED Ed segments on 3s, which I really liked. It kind of makes a cool, like, hand-drawn, handmade feel, which is, a big part of the style at Augenblick in general is keeping traditional animation kind of in our hearts and in our minds as we do our work, and letting the old masters inform the style that we do, while using it to do something kind of new and different and like hopefully pretty cool. So I can continue doing this lip sync a little bit so that you can see it work Soup.
When you go to wrap up, I would ask people to chat any questions they have, and I'll read them to you.
That'd be great. Yeah, I want to answer as many questions as I can. Twos are interesting as well because I got to do some messing around.
Soup is a liquid.
Twos are interesting as well. Twos are interesting because you can get away with a lot more. You can kind of, especially in lip sync on twos, you can leave out whole syllables. You kind of got to mess around with it to see what looks right. That's why I don't like, it's interesting. Lip sync is tough because I don't find that there are actually that many hard and fast rules with it. Sometimes people like to do ease out to big mouths, which would mean, you know, you could have an in-between here that's closer to the big mouth than to the closed mouth. Some people would want the ease to come between this frame and this frame, where you have something in between that falls closer to this the teeth mouth. It really depends on the lip sync. This one specific piece of audio that you've got to work with. So you can kind of develop your own system, but it's tough to say that there's any one hard and fast rule with lip sync. So lick. Whoa.
Soup is a liquid food.
Oops.
Soup is a liquid food. Soup is a liquid food.
Katie, there's a question about ones and twos. When it comes to drawing on twos and ones, can you mix those at all?
So there was a question that can you mix ones and twos in animation? And I personally think that the answer is definitely yes. In fact, I definitely suggest it. Even though I tend to do my character animation on twos, for some fast action, like to do it on ones. And it's, if you use it creatively, people kind of won't notice. Animation mixing ones and twos is, I tend to use, if I'm mixing them, I tend to use ones for fast action. Like if you're whipping an arm, that whip part will be on ones, but then the bounce back to settle will be on twos. And sometimes even threes or fours, depending on how subtle the action is and how much time you have to in between it. Or if you have assistants working for you. So yeah, I definitely say, mess around and figure out what works best for you and for the style that you're kind of working with. I think that old Disney movies might even do a mix of ones and twos. It might be all ones for Disney because they got the budget for it. But they might do some mixing, especially in the stuff from the 9 Old Men, which were working around the 60s, and in movies like 101 Dalmatians has amazing character animation by Milt Kahl, who's kind of my one and only mentor, not one and only, but the guy that I look to as the gold standard of character animation, and he did not think he was that good at it. So what does that say about us?
On that note,
Yes.
Juan is asking, is going to be 24 frames per second?
Drunky is going to be 24 frames per second.
Juan.
Oh, hi, Juan. Where is the camera? There it is. Hi, Juan. Drunky is definitely going to be 24 frames per second. We haven't even had our animation kickoff kind of meeting yet. We're probably going to work out the style. I'm guessing it's going to be a mix of ones and twos. Just because that's kind of a more flexible style than saying we're completely married to doing only twos or only ones. And on projects like Ugly Americans, I remember Ugly Americans is actually a really good example of animation to look at. That's a mix of 1s and 2s. That's pretty much all we worked in for Ugly Americans. Our show, The Jellies, which is only available, the first season of which is only available on the Golf Wang app. That, I think, was mostly 2s with some 1s thrown in. So if you want to see examples, there's also definitely a trailer of Jellies online. So if you look at the Jellies trailer, you'll see an example of when we used mostly 2s. And if you watch an episode of Ugly Americans, that's an example of when at Augenblick we did mostly a mix with, you know, a single action would have the fast movement on the 1s and then the settles on 2s. Sure.
We have Catherine.
Oh, hey, Catherine. You have the same name as me.
Is the animation for the movie done mostly in Flash, or is it possible to do a quick walkthrough from the process from start to finish?
Ooh, a quick talk through on the process from start to finish is is an oxymoron. So Catherine is asking, is Drunky going to be animated mostly in Flash? And as of right now, I think the answer is yes. We tend to work in Flash at the studio. A lot of studios, other studios are working in Toon Boom and in Harmony, I think, is another piece of. And we also use After Effects for some of the effects and compositing. It's kind of a combination of softwares that all down the pipeline add up into a beautiful finished film. And I think backgrounds are potentially going to be painted digitally. So Photoshop is another part of the process. A quick walkthrough of the entire process of making Drunky is that we start with thumbnail. Well, we start with a script, obviously. You write the script. We got everyone to record from the script. Our main characters, Sam Rockwell and Jeffrey Tambor and Steve Coogan and Nina Arianda, they all came in and into the recording studio and did their vocal recording, which I think is there any behind the scenes stuff available yet?
On drunkymovie.com.
On drunkymovie.com, there is some pretty good video of voices being recorded. So that happens before art gets laid down. I think there's some concept art that gets laid down, that was laid down first. But just so that the actors had something to look at and like knew what their character was going to look like and kind of got the vibe of who they were playing, which is kind of cool. And I believe that you can see some concept art on the Indiegogo page too, which you guys have already visited if you're here, obviously. So you do the vocal recording, and then with the vocals recorded, a radio play gets made where it's all edited together, and you have this big, long piece of audio for the whole movie, basically, with a little bit of room left in for action, but it kind of tends to get slid around to accommodate action sequences that don't have as much dialogue. So with that audio, you listen to it, and you do thumbnails, which our thumbnails were actually pretty intense, but it's literally kind of looks like this, where it's like little characters in the screen. You know, you get some idea of what the background's going to be like. Drunky might have Nowheresville behind him. It's literally kind of looks like this, where it's like little characters. Really rough drawings like that. And then it moves on to after thumbnails are created for a scene. You know, you've got like your line of dialogue underneath here. And I think there's actually some pages of Drunky thumbnails available, or they were emailed out maybe. Instagram. On Instagram, there's some Drunky. There's some, yeah, drunkymovie.com has all this stuff too if you want to find any of it. At Drunky Movie is the Instagram handle. And actually you can see some character, auto recovery. You can see some character designs too. So that's kind of exciting. Once you've got these little thumbnails, it moves on to storyboards, which I worked on some of the storyboards for Drunky. What did I do? I have, I think, one screenshot of a storyboard that I did that I took as an example of a down shot on Drunky where you just see the street behind him. But this is kind of the level, I mean, this is a really basic shot for storyboards, but this is a good example of like the level that our animatic / storyboards looks like. And because we have audio, our storyboard animatic is set to the audio, which allows us to basically have like a black and white non-animated version of the whole movie, which is super useful to see how scenes are playing out, see how like what jokes are landing, what's hitting, what's working, what's not. It's very useful, I think, to show people who haven't seen, if you're working on a piece of your own and you create an animatic or a storyboard, I highly recommend showing it to people who don't know anything about your project and just, you know, seeing how they react, see if they're getting all the story points, see if they understand what they're watching. I told this story to people in the studio a lot, that I went to RISD and I had a professor there who, it was intro to animation class, and we were watching group project. We were, you know, watching in a group for some assignment we had done, and a kid showed his piece. I cannot remember who it was, and I would not throw him under the bus like this, but he showed his piece, and our professor said, I didn't really get that. I didn't get this plot from what I watched. And the kid started explaining. He's like, well, this character was doing this, and this was the story. And the professor, like, politely but sternly sort of cut him off. It was like, I'm not asking you to explain it. I'm just telling you I didn't get it. You're not always going to be sitting there next to whoever's watching your work to explain to them what's going on. So, you know, it's potentially painful but healthy to show someone who might not get it and who might potentially give you bad feedback. You know, a great thing to bear in mind is that pain delayed is pain exacerbated. So it's better to learn early that something is wrong, and while you still have time to fix it with a piece. So, you know, so once we get these storyboards all kind of fleshed out, and, you know, get the sound all working, get the timing right, get the, you know, just make sure it's hitting in this rough version, and change things while we still have time to change them. And then it moves on to layout, which at our studio, laying out a scene basically means the backgrounds get drawn nicely, maybe not painted fully, but drawn nicely. And the characters get put in place. Because we're working in Flash, we work with symbols a lot. There's usually a symbol for the character. So that gets put in place. It's basically a color version of this drawing, this little storyboard drawing. And then the layout artist hands off the file with the character in there and the background in there to the animator, and the animator starts animating. The animator animates the piece. It all kind of gets put together into a rough animation pass, and you kind of do more like refining the whole way through. You kind of keep tweaking things the whole way through. The animation process is where a lot of the like nuanced acting stuff comes in, which is you know, pretty exciting and fun. And it's also really fun to see the piece start really coming together and looking more and more finished as you go. And once the animation is done, our wonderful editor / editors takes the animation file, the Flash files, puts them through After Effects, edits them in, I believe, Premiere these days. It used to be Final Cut, but Final Cut's kind of on its way out, which is too bad for me because that's what I learned in school. And basically, you know, once everything's all beautiful and affected and the images are perfect, then they go to our excellent sound production people at Great City Productions in New York, and the audio is completed. Everything is kind of put into its master delivery form in a big, giant, beautiful, like high quality file, and the movie is all done, and you release it to the world, hopefully the world.
One last question.
Oh yeah.
Catherine is out asking, what are some inspirations, influences for when you try to capture for Drunky and in your animations for Augenblick?
Ooh, there are definitely a lot of that. Okay, so yeah, so Catherine is asking influences, like what are the influences that we have used to inspire us for Drunky and for the studio's work in general? And I mean, Fleischer cartoons, old Fleischer cartoons are like our Bible, basically. I haven't shown all of these pictures that I got, but you know, this is a small picture, but this model sheet of Bimbo is like, I saw this and like got a lot of Drunky vibes out of it, actually. You know, we love classic animation at the studio. We love traditional hand-drawn, and CGI is great and can do some really amazing things. But there's something so special and lots of artistic decision making that goes into creating something this stylized and this like simple and pure. I think it's nice that like you could look at this, blown up and it looks great. You can look at it that small and still get the vibe from it of what you're looking at and get the mood of the character. I heard an artist once describe the difference between 2D and CGI animation as CGI animation. You're making so many decisions about how it looks that every decision is sort of, creates this one big image that is beautiful and polished. But when you look at a 2D piece of animation, you see the decisions that were made about the line and how the character was represented, and just, you're reducing something to a simpler form. Like this is great milk cow animation. Hair gets simplified. This like facial expression. Peter Pan's eyebrows are great. Milk Cow always does these awesome like head wiggles, kind of. Merlin, he's great. It's so simple and so, just graphic, really geometric. I'm sad that Disney is no longer doing these like beautiful hand-drawn films, as great as their CGI stuff is. This is another great example of simplified shapes in animation that I really like. It's also a great example of secondary action, where you've got Pocahontas running and her figure is pretty solid, and some nice mood stuff with her head going up and down, but her hair is moving totally independently of this run cycle that was created for her. These are some great Popeye sheets, character sheets, which I pulled up to talk about my the center of action of emotion. Like, you've got this wrist leading this action. Popeye's like, as a puppet, his butt is apparently like being yoinked around, and it's played for comedy. Olive Oil's posing here is a great example of like inspiration for what we do at Augenblick, and why we love 2D animation so much. I personally, in my style, like the pieces that I do here at the studio, I really like UPA cartoons like Gerald McBoing Boing, and super graphic, simplified stuff that forces you to make a lot of decisions about the picture that you're representing to people. And hopefully, because you're stylizing and kind of turning emotions into symbols through really, bold poses, really evocative, like, strong visual language, you're getting an idea down to its simplest, purest form and communicating that to an audience, which, are there any more questions that I can answer? No more questions? Sure.
We're gonna have a drawing challenge for you after you wrap up.
Oh yeah, all right. Yeah. Based on these beautiful drawings you've seen me do, I can do anything. So yeah, my closing thoughts were, because I love character animation so much, it's kind of more about like the acting and character animation, what we're doing with that. When you do character animation, be empathetic and observe the behavior and body language of other people constantly, because that will definitely inform what you do as an animator. Use the acting to tell a story to the audience. A character's acting can say something entirely different from the words that they're speaking. A character can say one thing, but if their body language is turning away from what they're saying, and they, are looking down and looking up in thought and being conflicted, it says a lot about the information that they're delivering and how they feel about it. The acting will add subtext, weight, and meaning to otherwise trivial dialogue, potentially. Don't waste a line. And character animation is about getting to be an actor and step into a character. It's better than being an actor, because no one is judging you personally. They're just looking at this other character. You get to be characters. Ugly Americans was a great example for me, that getting to animate characters like Leonard, who is like a drunk old wizard. Like, if I were an actor, I wouldn't get to play a drunk old wizard. But being a character animator means that you get to act as someone entirely different from you. It's really fun. And you know, when you take acting like that to a high level, it's a way to like be these different characters and see the world through their eyes. Seeing the world through Drunkie's eyes is going to be really fun. And you know, lose yourself in what you know the character is thinking and feeling. Like, be that person who, when you're drawing a, you know, angry face, be the person like who is like making that angry face at the drawing, and like let the sincerity, you know, don't be self-conscious because it's not you on the screen, it's a character. So kind of lose yourself in what you know the character is thinking and feeling, and your audience will lose themselves in the performances and in the story. And I guess that's it for closing thoughts on character animation.
Everybody's really thanking you a lot. Everybody's saying thank you. That was fantastic.
Oh, it's
Good job. We have a challenge. Someone wants you to draw Oscar the cat.
Ooh.
And then we're done.
Oh, I love Oscar. All right, I can draw Oscar. Let's get rid of this. And get rid of that. All right. Oscar the cat. Ooh. Oh, I love Oscar. Oscar has
Tell me who you're drawing.
all right, I'm drawing Oscar the cat in a drawing request / challenge. Oscar, actually, oh, on Oscar, I'm going to do actually first a really rough thing. But Oscar the cat is played by Tyler, the Creator, who visited the studio recently. And as he spoke, all I could hear was Oscar's voice. If you want to see some of his amazing acting as Oscar, or yeah, hear his amazing acting, see the amazing animation as Oscar, check out the Indiegogo page. Actually, I think Oscar makes an appearance in one of the videos. Oscar is actually, yeah, and I helped do the character turnarounds for the movie, for the model sheets. So luckily I got to draw Oscar from every angle, and he's really nicely, he's got the same kind of thing as Drunky does, like this line across his face that goes from black to white, and stuff like that. Back to character construction is really useful for, I think this is his torn ear, is really useful for directing where a face is pointed. So like this basic outline for Oscar's face, but you can use where his nose is and that black line on his face. Yeah. sorry, yeah. But sorry, my mind's wandering. But yeah, now I'm concentrating on drawing. Sorry, my mind is wandering. But yeah, I'm concentrating on drawing. Oscar's usually kind of pissed off. I think Oscar smiles like twice in the whole movie. He's an angry kitty. This is also, just want to point out that Oscar is the namesake of Aaron Augenblick's cat, Oscar, and looks just like him. I've had the pleasure of babysitting Oscar the cat, and he hates me. So this is an accurate representation of Aaron's cat, Oscar. It's got a little peg leg. So this is an accurate representation of Aaron's cat, Oscar. He's got his tail. That's my like pretty rough drawing of Oscar. Let's see if I can do something a little bit better based off of that. That's my like pretty rough drawing of Oscar. Your little hat. Oh yeah, he's got these dots on his face. He's got some Peg leg. His little feet. He's got some bandages. He's banged up from God knows what. Got some bandages. He's banged up from God knows what. Oscar. So there's Oscar. I hope that you guys enjoyed this animation class. I hope it was useful despite my rambling, and I'm really excited to bring Drunky to you guys, and I hope that you guys get excited about it as we are, because it's going to be really fun. It's really awesome, and we are pouring everything we've got into it, so we hope that you enjoy it. All right. You guys get excited about it. Thanks, everyone. It's fun. Really awesome. Done. You're pouring everything we've got into it.